All right, let me make sure. Anyone who's on, let me know if you can hear me. We're going to give it just a couple minutes before we get started so that people can join. But if you're already on, please speak up. In fact, could everyone, and I'll mention this a couple other times during class as well, everyone who is on, at least say hi in the Slack chat if you can, just so that we can get a little bit of a head count of how many people are there. I know some people will get on a little later, so I'll go ahead and mention that again in like 10 minutes, maybe 20 as well, so that I can give people a chance. But that'll be really useful to help us get a head count. And one thing I think I'm going to try differently this week from last time is I'm going to probably spend a little less time pausing and giving an opportunity for asking a question essentially and having you guys respond through chat. I'm a little worried that that doesn't translate as well to a remote class because it leaves larger dead time. That doesn't mean I don't want to get responses or to have you guys chime in. I will still probably leave some pauses, some windows, but I want you to be chiming in just continually, whether or not there's a pause. If you have a question, if there's something that wasn't clear. A lot of these examples, because this is actually reusing basically the array lesson that I've done before in class. So a lot of them are interactive type questions. We're going through lists of examples. When we get to those, feel free to go ahead and just throw what you think the answers are for them into chat as we're working through them, because I probably won't pause for each one of them. Some of them are pretty long lists, and it would be quite the pause between each one if we were sort of waiting for everyone to get a response in. Also, one other thing, I said say hi in chat. Also, if you have not finished the homework or you got stuck on anything from the homework from this last class, go ahead and say something in chat as well about that. And this isn't, it's just trying to gauge whether it was a proper amount of work, whether it was too much, especially for the people who are newer to programming, because I know some of the people who are experienced, it was pretty basic. They moved through it a little faster. But people who are new to programming, it's a little hard for me to gauge if I'm giving what is a reasonable amount of work, whether you're feeling overwhelmed by how much there is, whether it was just too challenging or too easy. So hearing a little bit of feedback on that would be useful as well. All right, going to give it just another minute or so, and then we'll get started. We're first going to do, as usual, a little bit of a review. And in this case, we'll just be talking about running JavaScript in a browser and some of the stuff that we've done with that so far. And then we'll dive into arrays, which is our topic for today. I'm just going to be focusing entirely on how arrays work in JavaScript, what they're useful for, and how to use them. All right, let's get going. Anyone who joins late, just feel free to rewatch the earlier portion of the video. I already mentioned, I'll say it a couple more times as well. If you weren't on at the start, when you hop on, go ahead and just say hi, give a thumbs up, something in chat so that we know you're there. Just getting that sort of head count gives us a good idea of sort of how many people are on it during the class period. I know that some people are going to be watching this at other times, and that's perfectly acceptable as well, but it's just useful to know how many are actively there during the class. So starting a quick review. One of the things we learned about last time was how to run JavaScript in a browser, or at least a little bit of how to run JavaScript in a browser. We didn't go into too much detail on it. And the very basics that we did was we created an HTML document. This is about the most minimal HTML document that you could create. And the way that we get access to some JavaScript, and most of the time this would be run on a web server, which we'll dig into in more detail in the future. There is a web server that we're running. It's just very streamlined, very easy to use. But the way you get your JavaScript loaded and running on your HTML page is with the script tag. And it's just got this, just basically consider it magic set of strings, right? You just memorize it. Don't worry too much what it actually represents. It's just saying the type of script is JavaScript, which is really the only script that for the most part runs on websites anymore. There used to be other languages that ran on them, but it's not very common. And then the reference to where your source file is. In this case, since our index.js file is in the same folder as our index.html, we can just do a really simple index.js. And then inside of our JavaScript file that we're running on the browser, we are doing a couple things that are a little different than what we're used to. One of the main reasons that we're even running stuff in the browser right now is because it gives us a really nice and convenient function, the prompt function, which lets us get user input. And so that lets us write fun, interactive applications. One of the ones that will be part of your homework, which I haven't yet finished writing out, but I'm going to be working on right after class and get out, is going to be like a number guessing game. And so that would be something that you could do with static code, but it wouldn't be very fun because the number would either be random or it would be input in statically. So being able to prompt for user input makes it a much more fun thing. Basically, you'll be able to write a really simple game that maybe chooses a random number, and then a user has to try and guess it, and you can give them some feedback or some other interaction. But that's the purpose of prompt, and then what gets returned from it is whatever the user put into the prompt. And the way that we write, or the easiest way to write something into an HTML page, at least if you don't care about the other content on the HTML page at all, is just a straight document.write. So that's what we're going with here. We've just got document.write as our way to output something on the HTML page. And then we can click the run button. Oh, actually, I didn't want to do that. Let me stop that because I don't want to run the index.js. I want to run index.html. There we go. And when we run that, it prompts us just like the code had. And then due to the awkward bug in the preview window, you don't see it the first time this stuff runs. You'll see it the second time. Then it goes ahead and prints out to the screen or writes to the HTML what you had put in. And you can see that more clearly if we open this in another tab where we won't have that bug of not rendering. And if we inspect it, which lets us look at what's on this web page and look at the elements, the only thing in there is the text that we wrote into the DOM. So hopefully that was pretty straightforward, not too challenging. We'll continue to build on that and add additional things that you can do inside of a web page over time. So that should be sort of exciting because you're going to be able to upload stuff and get to see what you're doing outside of just a console. A lot easier to show someone what you've been working on if you can eventually point them at a web page that's running your code and say, oh, just go check this out. This is something I've been playing with. If there's any questions, anyone wants any clarity on that, again, just speak up in chat. I might circle back when I get a chance to see it. If not, we're going to get moving on to arrays right now. Again, one more time, if you haven't yet said hello, let us know that you're online in the chat and you've joined us live, then please go ahead and say hi in the chat so that we can know that you're live with us. But moving to arrays. So an array is a type of object, and I'm being very specific there when I say type of object as opposed to saying type, that contains a list of items, objects, other variables of some kind in order. So that's one of the key aspects of an array is they're ordered. I should have put that in this list down here too. Some of the important aspects of an array, and these will make sense to you as we work through a lot of the examples today, which is really, I think, the best way to get your head around how an array works, is that arrays in JavaScript, and some of this is unique from other languages, are dynamically sized. That means that your array, you don't have to tell it exactly how large your array is going to be, and you can continue to add items into an array, and it'll just keep growing as you add items in, whatever you're adding into it. Again, that's different than some languages. Some of them have dynamic arrays, some of them don't. Also, arrays in JavaScript, this is common with most languages, are zero indexed. That's going to be probably confusing at first, but I hope we'll have enough examples and work through enough things that it'll start to make sense for those of you who aren't familiar with it. I've got an example just below too that should help, I hope, point it out a little more clearly. It's inlined right in the notes. And then one thing that's very unique to JavaScript, I wouldn't say very, there's probably a couple of the languages I'm aware of that do this, is arrays can be mixed type. So there's no defining like this is an array of only strings. A lot of programming languages, in fact, a lot of type programming languages, you have to tell it what the type is going to be in the array when you are declaring the array. Oh, this is an array of strings. This is an array of integers. This is an array of objects of a specific type. JavaScript, you don't have to do that, and you can mix the different types into your array. So we'll just get started. And again, like I said, a lot of this is very hands-on to just work through some of this stuff. But let's go ahead and just show you some examples of creating some arrays here. So the first example here, arrays use these square brackets to denote I'm creating an array. So the first one, we're just creating a variable with the name of A and putting some items in the array, comma separated. So this is just a list of prime numbers. And if we look at A and we just output it on our read about print loop, we go ahead and see an array listing those back out, just the numbers that we put in. If at any time you have any questions, you want to ask something about how these work, feel free to speak up in chat and I'll try and circle back around to it. You can also create an empty array. You might think of this as very similar to, say, an empty string before, where it's just a string with no actual characters in there, but it's still a string. An empty array is something very similar to that. And then it doesn't matter what type you put into your array. So if we create one with food, we can put some of my favorite foods in it. We've got an array with food. What's nice about this A array up here in the food one so far is everything in those is of the same type. So everything in the food array is a string. Everything in A is a number. But that's not a requirement for arrays in JavaScript. You can also store different types in it. So this one has a string, a Boolean, and two numbers stored in it. And that's perfectly fine for an array in JavaScript. It doesn't actually matter that they all have to be the same type. Again, for people familiar with other programming languages, that may be a challenge or something that's new to you. It poses some challenges when you're working with arrays in JavaScript, but it also gives some benefits that you don't have to predefine your types. So moving on from just creating arrays, okay, we can store things in this list. We've got A, we've got food, we've got mixed types. But how do we actually read a value back out of this ordered list? Well, I already said that their arrays are zero indexed, so that's where this comes into having a meaning. The first position in your array, if you were to think of this, and this is a good visualization of what an array looks like in memory, at least conceptually, has an index of 0, and the next one has an index of 1. So if you're trying to refer to the first item in your array, you're going to refer to the 0 index. One way I've learned to think about this that helps out is to not think about what position it's in. Don't think, oh, that's in the first position. Think about how many steps it takes to get to the item you're looking for. So if you start at index of 0, it doesn't take any steps for you to get the item out. But if you want to get the 8 in this case, it takes 1 step to get there. It's just a useful way to think about it. But really, there's a lot of different ways to think about how to get them out. So how do we use that index? It's really simple. You just use the same square brackets after you've declared an array. So let me declare one more. I'm going to rename this one to nums in this case, 6, 5, and 4. But after you've declared an array, then you put the index in square brackets behind the variable name for it. And that will get the item at that index out of your array. So nums 0, this is in the 0 position because I renamed it to the nums array. So 6 is what I get back out. Or if we go up to the food array, just a moment. Let me change my sleep for my screen here so that it stays on. There we go. So if we go to the food array and we get the item at the 0 index, that's going to be pizza because that's what's at the 0 index. Now if we come back to our nums array and we get the item at the first index, that's 5. And if we get the item at the second index, that happens to be 4. And there's one more useful thing we'll talk about here, which is you can get the length of the array. So that tells us that there are 3 items in the array. Now, you notice earlier I was very specific about saying that an array is a special variable. It's not its own type. So if we do type of, like one of our arrays, let's see what we get back out. We get back out object. What you'd think, like, why is it an array? What is an object anyway? We're going to talk a fair bit more about that. Let's throw a pop quiz on here, and if people want to go ahead and try and list all of the different types that they remember that we've covered in JavaScript in chat, that'd be awesome. So we haven't really covered objects yet. We'll get into them in a lot more detail soon, but that's another type in JavaScript. And arrays are just a special type of object is what's really going on. However, they're so common, they're so useful that it's worth covering them, especially also because they're very common between different programming languages. One thing that can be a little confusing when people are just getting started working with arrays is the fact that you use the same square notation, the same bracket notation as it's known, to reference an item in an array. So in order to get a value out, and if you're creating an array, like I'm going to recreate my food array. And just change the order a little. use that same bracket notation to create my items in my array as I use to get the values out of the array. The only difference is I put it immediately after the array variable name when I'm trying to get items out. Oh, it's because I tried to declare it there. Can't redeclare it. So that needs a little practice, but it is also nice because you will get used to the fact that you're using the same type of syntax for an array. So it gets sort of comfortable. Oh, square brackets are sort of always the way I work with arrays. All right, this is another good one. This is a good exercise. Again, like I said, a lot of these were sort of made for more in person, but we're going to be working through them remotely. So I'm going to start with this numbers array. And then while I'm talking about the answer to the previous one, we're going to start with what's the value that I'm going to get back when I do number 0. While I'm talking about that one and why it's that case, why don't you go ahead and try and throw up answers in chat? Maybe I'll even scroll down actually. Here. Choose one of these if you want to, and just put an answer up in chat saying what you're trying to refer to and what you think the value is going to be for that when we reference it. And I'll work on getting this created so we can start with something. So we've got our numbers array to get started. And when I run each one of these lines, what do you think the answers are going to be? Go ahead and say what line you're talking about and then what you think the answer is, and we'll find out. So if we start with numbers of 0, that gives us 1, and that's because 1 is in the 0 index, the 0 position. So numbers of 1 gives us 7. Those two are relatively straightforward. They shouldn't be that tricky. Now numbers 1 plus 1. That one's a little more interesting. And this gets into learning how to break down code. So what you need to do is look at this and say, evaluate what is inside of these brackets first to figure out what the value is. In this case, that evaluates to 2. And then it will figure out, okay, I've got a numbers array, and I'm looking at index 2, so 0, 1, 2. So we should get 11 back out. So for numbers -1, that's another really interesting one. I suspect if you haven't run any of this code before, it's not going to be clear at all what you're going to get. How can I give it a negative index? And what you get back is undefined, and that's because there's no value in any sort of -1 index in this array. Got values in 0, 1, 2, and 3, but no -1. So this is a unique aspect. Again, another one of those things that JavaScript does differently than a lot of other programming languages. A lot of programming languages, if you refer to something outside of the bounds of your array, will throw some sort of error. JavaScript just returns undefined as the value. So you refer to something that isn't a real index in your array, you're going to get back undefined. You're going to get the same thing for 7. And 18, because 7 and 18 are also indexes that aren't in our array. But let's try numbers 0, and we get back 1. And the reason for that, if it's not clear, is because it's falling back on that type coercion. What happens here is it says, oh, an array needs a numeric index to find the value at some position. This is a string, but I can coerce a string to a number. And in this case, I coerce that to 0. So if I did numbers of quote 1, it coerces it to 1, and the value there is 7. Ooh, how about 1 minus 1? Yeah, we can try that. Again, it's just breaking it down. So if we break down what this is based off of our, let me pull up the whole array again down here. 1 minus 1 is 0. So then you're just looking at what's in the 0 index of this array, which happens to be 1. So let me know if there's any questions about that. We're going to keep building on this and just continuing to work with things. Going to skip over this, create the following arrays in Node. That's something that'll probably be just some of the homework, some very basic homework assignment items of getting used to just declaring arrays and working with them. So then let's go ahead and another one. This is another one that'll probably be homework. Give you an awkward array like this and just say, what are the indexes for the different values of this array? And that's just getting practice at how you do that. But we can also practice some of that right now if we want. Oops. Of course, it opens that up. I don't think I'm actually allowed to have a variable named array. I'm not sure. We'll see. I am. And you'll notice here we're even storing a value of null in the array. Let me see what the index is. Have to walk through it. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're storing 1 at 4. Let's check and see if I have that right. Yep. And we're also storing null at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So if I asked you what the indexes are of the given values, for null, there's more than one index. And for 4, there's also more than one index that matches 4. Because the indexes for 4 are 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 3 or 8 both have that same value. And then, once again, we can get the length of any array by just doing this dot length property on it. And we'll talk about that in a little more in just a moment and what's going on with that dot length. Because so many of these are very, very interactive. I'm going to put all this on the screen again and try and do the same thing that we did last time. If you have the arrays that we have up on top visible, and these are the expressions that we're trying to evaluate an answer for, why don't you take a guess at what the results are for one of these? Or if one of them doesn't make sense to you, you're looking at it and you're going, I have no idea what the result's going to be for that because it doesn't seem to make sense. Say that too. And we're going to go ahead and just try and work through these and we'll find out. I don't know what the answer is to each one of these. It's been a while since I've done this. But I'm going to get them started by getting them into the system. once I didn't write that correctly. All right, let me double check that all these exist. Yep, they all look correct to me. So let's try some of this out. Scroll up just there, give me as much space as I can get down here. And let's start with odds 1. And before I run this, I'm going to try and think through what I'll guess the answer will be. So you may even see me not know the answer on some of these. I made them tricky intentionally, so there's not always an obvious answer. Oh, good question. I'll come back to that in a minute on pulling 2 items from an array at the same time. So odds 1. Odds is my array. Got to quit double clicking stuff. Odds 1, 0, 1. I'm guessing the value is going to be 1. Okay. Pretty easy for me. Animals 3. The animals 0, 1, 2, 3. Guessing tiger. Looks good. Numbers 1 plus 1. Again, evaluating this, breaking it down. 1 plus 1 is 2, so that'll be numbers at index 2, 0, 1, 2. I think it's 3. Awesome, looks right. Numbers at -1. We said before, there's not a -1 index in this array, so I'm guessing it's going to be undefined because it's referencing something outside of the bounds of the array. It is undefined. It might be a little weird that I'm emphasizing the -1, but that's another one of those aspects of if you're familiar with other programming languages. Some programming languages support negative indexes, and it's basically as if you're counting from the back of the array to the front. It doesn't work that way in JavaScript, though. So about numbers, 5 divided by 2. I have no idea off the top of my head what this is going to be, because if I look at this, I have 5 divided by 2 is 2.5, which is not an integer, so it can't really be an index. So maybe it'll give me undefined back for this. All right, because there can't be anything at that non-integer index, I guess. I don't really know exactly why it appears that way. Now you'll see that you can really put any expression inside of this array reference notation. So here we have animals at numbers 1. I don't know if I saw anyone take a stab at this, but if anybody wants to give it a try, go ahead and take a guess at what the answer is going to be for this one. Dog. All right. Let's see. So if we're breaking it down, let's see what it is. It is dog. That's correct. So if we break it down, the reason is because numbers 1, 0, 1 is 2. So now it's put 2 in this space, and then it says animals at 2, 0, 1, 2, dog. So that's an example of learning how to break down a problem piece by piece, learning how to read it from the inside out, learning how to understand the order that the code is being processed in by the programming language. going to take a quick break. It's getting off of my screen and I don't want to miss it. Somebody asked if it's possible to pull 2 items from an array at the same time. The answer is not really. You can't, I mean, you can. So I can do numbers of 0 plus numbers of 1 like that. But I can't do something like numbers of 0 and 1. Great. I think I can. Let me try this again. No, I think it's just giving me back whatever is at the second one of these numbers. So I can't get 2 items that way. Now there are, and we'll get into this later, there are methods that exist on arrays that let you pull out portions of an array. But what you're getting out when you do that is an array still. It's just a portion of an array. And there is something, and I probably won't even introduce it, but there is a very new syntax that does let you get multiple items out of an array all at once. It's something really new to JavaScript, so it's not even very common. So moving on, we can see that what you get back from the array can just be used in other expressions. There's nothing wrong with that. So odds 3 plus numbers 1 is less than 2 is false. And if we break that down, it's odds at 3, 0, 1, 2, 3. So that's 1. And numbers at position 1, 0, 1, that's 2. This is essentially saying 1 plus 2, which is 3, is less than 2. That should be false. And you can also use items in your array in any sort of Boolean operation. So here, bools 3 and bool 0. Bool 0 is true. 1, 2, 3. So both of those are true. So true and true is true. And I'll just skip over this last one. So now we've seen how we can get values out of an array. But yeah, you could, somebody mentioned that you could, if you're trying to print multiple things, you could print multiple things out of an array at once, right? Like you could do console.log odds 0 plus odds 1. Oops, we got to put an extra plus there. And that's going to print both of those out at once. But you can't get them back and assign them into a variable or use them in some operation at once, at least not in JavaScript. So moving on, we're able to read values out of our array. Now, you use the exact same syntax to store values in an array. So if we start with a new array, array equals 1, b, and true. And we want to put something in the first position. We want to change the value from 1 to 5. We just use the same syntax, except we assign something into it. So array 0 equals 5. And now our array has 5b and true. So just like you've done with any other variable where you can assign something into the variable using an equals, or you can read it out if it's in a position where it's going to be read. You can do the same thing with anything in an array. So we'll continue to make more changes to this. We'll change true to false. And we'll change the item at this index to C. And if we were to look at our array right now, we see that we now have 5 C and false because we've changed the values in those first 3 positions. But you can even grow an array. And so here, if we look at, we're referencing the item in the array at index 3, What we have right now is something at 0, 1, and 2, so there's nothing at index 3. There is no index 3. So if we try and read it out, we get undefined. If we do array.length, we see that it's 3 items long. But if we put something into index 3, like 10, now we see that our array has gotten longer. It actually added it to the end of it. And that's the value there. So that's one way to actually grow an array. You can just reference an index that's outside of your index bound. Now let's do something that's really interesting. We put something at index 5 in the array. So now you're wondering, hopefully, well, what happened to index 4? You skipped right over it. Let's see what our length of the array is now. Our length is 6, whereas before it was 4. So it added 2 items, or at least it looks like it did. Oh, wow, this is really nice. I haven't seen this before. This is Node being very, very nice to you, showing you that there is an empty item in the array here. Before, it may just not show it, or it may show undefined there, but it's actually showing you like, oh, you never put anything here. So now if we try and read out at position 6 or 5, where we just put our new thing, we've got 66. And if we try and read array at position 4, it's undefined. And that's the same thing that would happen if you reference something outside of the bounds of your array, as you'd get undefined. So that can also be a bug or something that you end up doing by accident, where you put something at it well after other items in an array, and you've got a whole bunch of undefined array items now. It's also sometimes intentional that you can do that in JavaScript. And then we can assign null to position 1. So you notice we don't even have to assign a new value of the same type as it was before, because before we had C in that position, and now we changed it to null. It doesn't matter. And you can do much more complex logic. Here in position 2, we're going to assign it the value of 3 is less than 7 and 8 is less than 3. And if we look, we've got false in there, which really wasn't a change, because that statement would be false. So we already saw, and again, if you have any questions while we're going through this, feel free to speak up. We already saw how one way to add an item to the end of an array, or to an array, which is just using an index out of your bounds. But another way to do it that's guaranteed to just push it onto the end of whatever your array is to just use the method push. And we'll talk more about methods in the future. But there's a couple interesting things here. I did array.push42. And if we look at our array, sure enough, 42 is the last item on there now. And it returned a value. It returned 7. Anyone want to take a guess at what that 7 is that it returned? What does that represent? So what do you get back when you push something onto the end of an array? Ooh, nice guess. It's index. That's not true, though, because it's actually at index 6, not 7. What you get back is the new length of your array. Yep. That's what you get back whenever you use the push method. So if I push something else on, it'll give me back 8, and that's because there's now 8 items in my array. So you see me using this length call in order to get the length of the array. And I've already mentioned that arrays are objects. We'll talk a little bit about that here and continue to keep building on this concept. So arrays are objects. They're one of the first objects we've encountered in JavaScript. An object, you can think of an object, again, we'll get into this a lot more, but an object is just it represents something. It's a representation of something, and it can have different properties, different things that can happen to it. So if you want to start thinking about it, you can think about objects around you all over the place and how they have properties. And just like physical objects have properties, objects in JavaScript or any programming language that works with objects has properties, and one of the properties on an array is its length. And to access a property on an object, you access them using what's known as dot syntax. So if we go ahead and create another array here, this one's just of some different heroes. We can see just how long it is by doing dot length. You can do that with any array. You get a lot of practice with that in the homework. Hopefully this dot syntax looks familiar to you. Anybody want to mention another place where we've been using this dot syntax as well? Oh, math.pal, that's good. We've been using it from day one, though, for one of our most common things that we do. We use it in pretty much every program that we write. Console.log. Yep, that's the exact same thing. That's dot syntax the same way, which should give a little bit of an indication. Let's check and see if this is what it says it is. Look at that. The console that we've been interacting with, the log stuff, it's an object, just like an array is an object. So it's got some properties on it as well, and something else known as methods that you can interact with. So just a couple more things to cover tonight, and then I will be working on some homework to get out to you as well this evening. The next one, this goes back a little bit to the last class as well, or the class before, which is we've talked about while loops, right? So basic while loop, for example, and this time I'm going to take this whole program and throw it into my Scratch file to cheat, so I'm not typing it out line by line. This is a very basic while loop program, where if I run scratch.js, we see it going through this while loop. The count isn't at 42 yet, so it keeps telling you it's not the answer. And then when it reaches 42, goes ahead and tells you, yep, that's the answer. By the way, if anybody doesn't get these are really nerdy references to a book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So while loops are also a really easy way to work with arrays and enumerate over an array. So if we have an array, I'll scroll this up and then move my window up a little bit, and we'll work it down bit by bit. But if we have an array like this one here, variable array equals, and I'm just going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And if I create just another variable that I can use as an index placeholder, and we can write a while loop to look at every item in this array. We're going to say while index is less than the array length, then log the array item at the index And then the other thing I need to make sure I don't have an infinite loop here is I need to increment my index each time I'm in my while loop. And then I can end it. And it runs through and reads or writes each item out of the array, one by one. Hopefully that's not too complicated, not too tricky for you. You might want to take a look at these notes when I post them all in just a little while and look at this really basic example to get some practice before you go into much more complex stuff. But that's very simply how you walk through the items in an array. But you don't just have to walk through them. You might actually do something into the items in your array. So let's take this same array that we had before. And I'm going to reset index to 0. And this time, instead of just reading out the items in the array, we'll go ahead and do something to each item in the array in our while loop. So we'll get the array at an index equals the current value of the array at that time plus 5. And we can log it out, the array at that index, and we can increment the index. And what we see, and I'll write the array here as well so you can see it. Is you see it write out all of the values in our array plus 5, and that's what we have stored in our array now. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Not 100% sure why that second 6 printed at the bottom there. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But, oh well. Our index should be 7. And then if you want to start building some much more complex code, you can combine this sort of while looping over your array with maybe an if statement. So let's get our original array back. We're going to put our index at 0. And then we'll go ahead and run this bit of code. While I'm typing it out, again, if anybody wants to take a guess as to what this code does, if you did the homework from last class, then you should remember this is the remainder operator. So this should hopefully look familiar to some of that homework, but take a guess at what this bit of code is going to do. You don't have to say exactly what's getting output, just what's the intention of this code? Look at this code and what is it trying to do? For each item in the array, if the item is divisible by 2, it will print it into the console. Yeah, if it's evenly divisible, if it's a multiple of 2. I think that extra 6, by the way, is getting printed out for some reason because this read eval print loop is evaluating the length of the array and printing that out as the evaluation of this while loop at some point. It's a little strange, but that's what we see is only the even numbers get printed out here, right? Pretty simple, but it's a nice way to show that we're building something up. We're combining these different concepts, and it doesn't take a whole bunch of complex code in order to build out something that's relatively capable as a program. So we'll do one more of these, and then I'll talk about a couple common mistakes, or at least a category of common mistakes that people are likely to make. So take a look at this one, and while I am, again, setting up the environment, getting it put in, look through the code and try and figure out what it's going to do, or what is it logically trying to do. Again, not necessarily what exactly is going to get output, but what is the intention of this code? It'll show the first 3 items in the array. All right, that's one guess. For each item in the array, if the item's length is less than or equal to 3, it will print to the console. There we go. That's a good explanation of, good guesses. No, don't, you shouldn't be ashamed of taking a guess. I think it's really important to take guesses as to what code's going to do, because it's going to help you learn what did I do wrong when you look at it. You're going to say, did I make a wrong assumption? Did I not read the code thoroughly enough to figure out exactly what it was doing? Did I not break it down enough? That's critical to really just learning how to fully understand how to work with code. So we break this down, and it's a bit by bit thing. Okay, this is our basic loop over the array. We've already done that a few times. Pretty comfortable with it. So then what's going on here? Again, breaking it down from the outside to the inside. Index, well, we already know how that works. That's whatever point we're at. Then we're getting the animals, whatever is in this animals array, at that index. So this is just moving us through the array. And whatever's there in this case are strings. Nice and easy. And then a string has a length property. So we're checking the length of the string. And if that length of the string at that position is less than or equal to 3, we're going to log it out. So that's just that process of breaking down what happens. I'll be taking this. Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's the key is you got to be careful about how you're reading the code. And some of it is just learning how to read it, learning how to break down what it's actually doing at any point in time. You'll see this one again, but I'll probably throw in some errors or something with it, because again, this was a nice, easy one. The array is all the same type, so it's easy to work with. I might throw that last one up there as a homework, so I'm going to skip over it. So last couple things tonight is let's talk about an example of a very, very common set of errors for working with arrays or really just anything. And that's what are known as the off by one errors. I would say this is probably one of the most common errors you're going to make when you're getting into programming. You're going to do this a lot, both because arrays are zero indexed, and that's counterintuitive, and because you just have your math a little off in terms of what you're trying to do. There's a common programmer joke that is really, I love my super nerdy ones, and it says there's only 3 hard problems in computer science: naming things and caching invalidation. Wait a minute, that was two. And off by one errors. Yeah, I can't even hear you guys in person, but I hear the sighs. It's okay. I hear the digital sigh. So a good example of what can happen, an off by one error, right? Let's take we're gonna do a very simple program here again. And I'm going to see Captain Marvel on Friday. I'm excited to go see that. So let's just list some of my other favorite superhero movies. Take this bit of code. Take this bit of code that we have here. Nothing too fancy. Let me do some let me word wrap so that you can see it all. There we go. And I just want to list some of my favorite superhero movies. Really simple program. I'm going to run it. And what do we see? Some of my favorite superhero movies are Wonder Woman, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Guardians of the Galaxy, Thor Ragnarok, and Undefined. And can anybody see where my off by one error is in this bit of code? It's a little subtle. It takes a little bit of time to really look at the code and figure out how am I off by one here. Length is counting objects in the array, but I'm starting at 0. Yeah, that's one way to perceive what's wrong. And again, this is one of the reasons why this one is so common, is it's very easy to think, oh, I need to look at everything in my length, through my length. But in reality, the value of length is going to be 1 greater than the last index of your array. And so yes, in this case, the equals is what's throwing my stuff off, because I'm checking if index is less than or equal to the length. That means that after I do 0, 1, 2, 3, since my length is 4, it's going to add 1. I'll have 4, which is still less than or equal to. So that we'll go ahead and run through the loop and produce that undefined error. And there's a couple ways to fix this, right? I could say less than, or if I felt like I really wanted to stick with less than or equals to there, I could say index is less than movies.length minus 1. So that I'm not doing the full length, I'm cutting off or reducing my length by 1 essentially. Or I could just change this to just an equals to or less than, and then that works just as well. Both of those accomplish the same thing. You'll definitely have these. It doesn't matter how long you've been programming. You're going to get off by 1 errors every once in a while in your code. So it's something to just be familiar with and know it's going to happen. And, I mean, I guess just don't get too scared by it when that happens. Don't get too frustrated, too worried about it. All right. That's I think all I really wanted to cover on arrays today. Again, I'm going to go back up to this list of some of the important properties of arrays in JavaScript and just review them. And that includes that arrays are an ordered list, so their order matters. They're dynamically sized, so you don't have to say how large they are. They can grow. You can also, I believe, delete items from an array. I'd have to look at that in more detail. They're zero indexed, which is something that you need to pay attention to. So the index of the first item in the array is 0, and they can be mixed type. So all the items in any given array don't have to be of the same type. They can be of any type that exists in JavaScript. Let me know if there's any questions after this. Post something in Slack. I'm going to work on getting some homework to work on arrays out to you guys, hopefully within the next hour or so is my plan to try and get something out. I realize that there's really only a day between now and Thursday, so there's no expectation that whatever I get you is completed by Thursday. I mean, it's great if you get the opportunity to work on it and try and do all of that, but otherwise, just do your best to take a look at it, and we'll probably add some additional homework on Thursday, and then that gives you a little bit more of a window, Friday, Saturday, or the weekend to keep working on some stuff. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call it for today, but thanks for those of you who are on. Again, if you didn't at least say hello and you were in the chat, go ahead and speak up and just let us know that you were watching this class so that we can have a rough head count of the people who were watching it while it was live.